and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Yep, it is. Views expressed are those of the speakers. In this case, you'll find out who they are, and are not intended to represent WRFU, YMCA, Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on the TV version of this show, UPTV. So whose views are these? I'm sorry, I'm adjusting volume, so bear with me. These views are our own, and by our in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest, who will hopefully introduce himself right now.
My name's Mike Doyle. I'm Executive Director at the University Y.
Aha. Really?
Yes.
University YMCA.
Yes, it is.
Is that the young men's version of the Y?
It is, although our name is Young Men's Christian Association, and we're more young, but not totally. Men, very minority-wise. Most of the people involved in our programs are women. And Christian, we're very interfaith-oriented. So we are an association, but not easily defined beyond that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you know anything about the trajectory of the Y over the years? So how did it become the Young Men's Christian Association to this interesting today? Kind of disparate group that it is now?
Sure. It started back in the 1840s or 50s. I don't know the exact year. And it was a result of urbanization that was going on in England. So as people were heading from the countryside into London and other places, there was a concern that the young men who were traveling there to get work would lose their Christian values and be corrupted by the city.
I see.
And so the Young Men's Christian Association was formed as a way of providing space and a place for them to gather and where they can maintain their Christian values and focus and not be corrupted by the city. And that's where it really grew. But the core of that really is that as people come to a place to provide a way for them to be at home, to be themselves, to believe what they believe in, and to flourish and grow as best as they define themselves. So the very fact that it's a very different organization today than it was many years ago, in some ways, at the core, it's doing the same kind of work.
That's really interesting. And I should have known that you would know this, too. I mean, it's kind of like part of the job. They give you the job and they say, okay, well, you're going to have to study up on the history of the Y in order to, adequately represent us, right? Or did you already know that?
I didn't know that, no. I mean, when I applied for the job at the Y, I had never been engaged or involved in the Y in any, I think I spoke at Friday Forum maybe once or twice in my younger years. But so I learned a lot about the Y, and everything I learned has been since I've been involved in the Y.
Wow, that's interesting. So somehow this kind of niche group, I don't know.
Either way,
it's one of those words I've heard people say it both ways, and I never
potato
knew
and potato.
which was the right one. Anyway, this little group that had a very specific mission somehow just lasted through all these years, and is still going strong. It's actually a pretty robust organization, right?
It is very much. It's international. It's around the globe. In the United States, it has a different feel to it than it does in most other places in the world. And at our university, Y, it's a little different than most people think when they think of the YMCA. They often think of a gym and a pool.
Yeah.
But we have neither a gym nor a pool. And I think for the United States, that model is common here, but really not elsewhere around the world. Again, it sort of grew out of Ys have focused on having strong communities, vibrant communities. We focus on three main areas with his youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. So at the core, that's what we do. But when, I forget what the point was that we were talking about a few seconds ago.
Well, we were talking about the history of the Y and how you learned about it and how it stayed strong over the years, despite being kind of a very specific
so it had
goal,
this role. In the United States, how Ys are different here. So I think after World War II, YMCA's developed pools. They were community gathering places. They would often have a pool or a gym to keep kids sort of off the streets and a place to do exercise and be healthy. And it sort of became this model that actually, as suburbanization happened, became facilities with memberships. And suddenly it was not that much different from many people's point of view than a Gold's Gym or a Cardinal Gym where you pay a fee and you go use the facilities. And I think in some ways the Y lost some of its roots that way. The tail began to wag the dog a bit. And so for the last 10 years, the organization's really been trying to become more mission-focused in its efforts nationwide. Now, our University Y, when I started there, I used to say, well, we're not your traditional Y, thinking of the gym and the pool.
Right.
That's all I knew.
Right.
But what I came to realize is that actually we're much more the traditional Y of an organization focusing on community, developing leadership, and that the Y that you see in the United States of the gym and the pool model is more typical in the United States, but not as traditional as some of the other.
That's really interesting. I'm glad to know that. I mean, not in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't help me much, but I've always wondered, like, you have so many events over there and so many programs going, and I always thought, well, what does that have to do with the Y? Because I grew up with the Y that you're talking about, right. The gym and a pool, and
maybe daycare. Some places will have daycare and stuff like that.
Have.
But you know, the Y, so it's very much, so our focus at the University Y is sort of threefold. It's working for social justice, it's protecting the environment, it's promoting global engagement, and it's encouraging faith in action. So those are sort of the areas that we do a lot of our programming. But we really focus on developing leaders among the students at the university, since that's sort of the core of what we do, and we try and bridge what they learn in the classroom with work into the community, so that they take what they learn, the knowledge and skills they get in the classroom, and apply it to real life issues and problems in our community and on our campus, whether that's cleaning up the environment or helping immigrant families and stuff like that. So we try and serve as that bridge between the campus and the community, developing leaders in those four basic areas.
So do other university-based Ys operate kind of like you do?
Yeah, I think some of them do. You know, today there's about 15 university or campus Ys around the United States.
Really? That few?
There's that few. In the 1940s, there were more campus Ys than there were community Ys.
Yeah, really?
There were over 1,000. And today there's 15. And so they're sort of like the dinosaur, like, well, what happened to them? But in the turmoil times of the 60s and 70s, as students really were looking for a different experience, a lot of Ys were like, well, we don't do that kind of stuff. So when anti-war got very popular on campus, a lot of campus Ys weren't involved in that. Or when the environmental movement came along, they weren't involved in that. So as they became less relevant to students, then students turned elsewhere for organizations and work that they did, and the campus Ys really disappeared very quickly over a period of about 10 or 15 years. Many of them closed. So what's unique about the one at the University of Illinois is that it's thanks to the leaders back then and the people who were involved, always stayed in touch with what students cared about, what they believed in. So during the anti-war stuff, it was one of the places on campus where people were very active. During the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, the Y was at the center of the controversies of the barbershop. There was a boycott of barbershops because they weren't going to cut African-American students' hairs, and the Y was at the center of that. So it's had this long history, and it's stayed focused where the students are, and as a result, I think has remained relevant on our campus and grown and flourished.
Yeah, it seems to. It's a very, I was going to use the word powerful, but that doesn't seem like the right word. A very energetic organization, robust.
Yeah, it's very dynamic.
Dynamic. Thank you. That's a good word for it.
It's a great place to work at. Yeah.
So how, before we talk about what the Y is up to these days, and I know you have some stuff that the Y is getting involved in, how did you personally find yourself like going, well, let's see, what I could either work in a restaurant or I'll go to the Y? I mean, like, how did you end up at the Y?
Well, so, you know, I'll go back a little bit. I came here as a student in the 70s. I had 3 years of undergraduate to do, and I was going to get my degree and go off to law school and plan to be in Champaign-Urbana in a very short period of time. And it's about 46 years later, and here I am. It's still in Champaign-Urbana. So, but my work from school, one of the reasons I stayed is although I was an urban planning student, I got involved in community organizations and served as an organizer in town for many years, for about 30-some years. And it was about 2008, and I probably needed a change of pace. I think my wife recognized it before I did, actually, and sort of like, yeah, you should look at something else. And you do the same thing for a while, you can get stale. And so at the time, it also was when Obama was first running. There was a lot of energy among young people, a sense of change in the air. And also, I'm getting a little bit older, and I thought, maybe it's time for me to take whatever I've learned and whatever it is and apply it and work with younger people and share that skills and knowledge. So. At that time, the Y was looking for an executive director, and I threw my hat in the ring, and they hired me. And so it's been a great experience, though. So I've very much been able to live that opportunity of working with young people and sharing what I know, but also learning from them. I think one of the great dynamics that exists in the organization that's there is, when you're young, you see the world very much in black and white. There's good and there's evil. It helps you. You're motivated, and you fight for what's right. I think as you get older, just over time, you start seeing a lot of grays, and everything's not so black and white, and there's always, there was this time when it was that, and so you appreciate some of the complexity of the world in different ways. But it also tends to lead to a little bit of inaction. So you may have this wisdom about everything is gray and not black and white. But it's like, well, what can I do? It's all gray. And so it's bringing those two together of the wisdom of older people and the sort of that dynamic understanding and clarity of a young person's view that I think is a great combination that happens there.
And that happens at the Y.
That happens at the Y, and that's what I switched from working in the community and organizing to being there to work with young people, and it's been a great experience. It's been lots of fun. So that's
cool.
how I got there.
So under your leadership, the Y has been, it seems to me, like I remember it before as being kind of I don't like mobilizing the L word that much, but kind of a liberal place, where it was like okay to be. But it didn't seem to me that the Y really pushed much. It was more a place where people had offices, or you could have meetings
conversation
there,
and I think the Y has always treasured the fact that it's a place where people of different viewpoints can come together and talk. I think generally it's perceived as sort of a liberal perspective, or a liberal community on campus. People who gather there are that. The history of it is varied. So, it's organization's 140 some years old. It started in 1873.
Right.
Like back then, it was the University of Illinois, and then the Young Men's Christian Organization on campus. So, it's the first nonprofit of Champaign County. But one of the things that is true when you have that long of a history is it's gone through many changes over time. So from the very first programming, it was about Christianity and Bible study. So the way we bridged the campus and the community was these young men did Bible studies in the community to younger folks. And that was sort of the focus for the first 30 or 40 years. It was all about our Christian values. Around the turn of the century, around the 1900s, when international students started coming to campus, the Y, again, in terms of welcoming people to the community, brought international students on campus. They used to pick them up at the train station, bring them over. We had housing on the third floor. We used to provide them housing, a place to stay till they could settle in. So we really started developing sort of a focus with international students and doing that kind of programming. In the 30s and 40s, it was around civil rights. It was the first organization to allow African Americans and whites to belong to the same organization, which is kind of weird, but true. And then the stuff that was going on in the 50s and 60s, and so forth. So it's really evolved over time. So in the 60s and 70s, I think it was a place where there was a lot of action going on, not just talking and cheering, but there was a lot during the civil rights, and the anti-war movement was very active that way. So in the 70s and 80s, it had a very strong social service focus. So there was a lot of the Youth Clearinghouse of Champaign County got started there, and several agencies, Chassis and other groups, spun off out of that. And so there was a strong focus on that. So I would say it's probably different under my tenure than previous tenures, but it's always been a place where it's evolved and changed, reflecting both the people who are involved in it, but also the times. The very fact that the Y is deeply involved in immigration in some ways is very organic. It wasn't like a conscious strategic decision that was made. It just reflected what's going on in the community and the world and where students are and the things that they care about. And because of that, the organization sort of reflects that.
So other heads of other Ys aren't looking at you like going, tell me, Mr. Why are you so interested in this immigration thing? They're not They're kind of like they get what's going on there.
It probably varies, but the very fact, and we're going to be announcing later this month that the Y has been selected by our national organization to be home for a New American Welcome Center.
Yeah.
And that is part of a national effort. So clearly there are Ys across the country that are deeply involved in immigration work, and some of them, like in New York City and Houston, have been for decades. They've been doing refugee resettlement and services, English as a second language and stuff like that for years. Again, not every Y, the one that might be in suburban Cook County that has a gym and a pool and it's an exercise facility, largely might not have the same kinds of concerns. But nationally, the reason, under its social responsibility initiatives, the reason the Ys get involved in this is we've seen a real change in the demographics of our communities that we're serving. And so to be serving the community and to be the community institution we are, we have to adjust who we are. And gyms and pools may serve some communities, but in other places there's much more important things that the communities need, and that's where the Ys end up working on. So answer to the question is some would say, yes, I completely understand it.
Yeah.
Some were doing it well before we were.
Right.
And for others, it's not something that's important in their community.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Because I find myself wondering from time to time. The theme of this show is immigration, obviously, so we talk about it a lot, and I think about it a lot. And I find myself wondering if immigration is an issue right now because there are lots of immigrants with needs right now, or because there is a sort of a nationalistic wind. Nationalism is in the air, and people are pushing against it, immigrants. So immigrants are having problems because they're being pushed against, or because there are more of them, or is it both? Or are they? I don't know.
Well, clearly, we see it here in the United States, a big issue, but it's a worldwide issue, right? I mean, it's happening everywhere, and the reaction against it, sort of that nationalist stuff you're talking about, it hit in Europe and elsewhere. I heard someone talking about it, and there's probably people that smarter than I talk about this a lot, but in the globalization of our world economy, we've allowed goods to travel every which way. We tear down the barriers, no more tariffs, everything.
Right.
Let goods pass over those borders. But what we don't allow is for labor to flow that way.
Right.
And labor has those same pressures in terms of economics and all that stuff. And so one of the things that's going on in the world is while we're letting the goods flow, we're locking labor in places, and we're restricting people, and they're not allowed to do that. And by creating those artificial barriers, stress builds up. And so I don't know enough about all the big issues, but I think there are major shifts worldwide that are reflected in this kind of debates we're having in the United States.
Well, that does make a lot of sense. If you think in terms of like how easy it is just to connect with and stay in touch with people around the world compared to just 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I can remember being a kid and hearing about somebody calling overseas on the phone and thinking, that's just amazing.
Yeah.
I can't believe that people can do that. And they're like, well, there's a time lag and you have to wait. So you say something and then you wait, and then they answer you, and then they wait. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And it just seemed like this huge thing. And having traveled as a kid, it was like, well, yeah, it takes forever just to get to the next town. How long would it take to get all the way around the world? And now it's like we do it all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just like, oh, hey, what's going on? Yeah. I mean, it's almost as boring to talk to somebody around the world as it is to talk to somebody next door, because you can do it. The magic of the connection is invisible now.
Yeah.
And so it's just you rely on the quality of the conversation to make it interesting. And so, I mean, it does follow that if we can talk that easily with people, if we can communicate and connect and see and share things, then
the seeing and sharing is a big part of it, right? People see what others have, and they strive for some of that themselves, right?
Yeah, so it makes sense that goods would go that way too. It would be that much easier to move items like, oh, that's a nice coat. Well, I got it. I ordered it from Italy, Right. I saw it online, and I just pressed go, and a week later, and there it was. So why is it so hard for somebody to come from that country to this country? Why is that the bottleneck?
Right. Yeah. I assuming it's serving someone's interest, right?
No, it does.
Right.
Most definitely.
And it also there's a long history in our country with immigration laws of also reflecting the biases and prejudices that we all have of each other, and fueling those. That, again, I think there's viewpoints that sort of soil the landscape in terms of how people view other people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the cultural purity and racial purity and all these things. So all of this is something that you, through the Y through you, or you through the Y, or both, want to push back against with your welcoming center.
New American Welcoming Center.
Yeah, how would that work exactly?
Huh.
I mean, the Y, the building itself is a center, or what?
Well,
what
so we say it's virtual and physical.
Okay.
And this is a national initiative by the YUSA.
Mm-hmm.
They piloted it in 6 cities last year, using a model that the New York Y has used for decades. But they piloted in New York, Houston, Boston, Seattle, Long Beach, California, and Minneapolis, St. Paul. And what they really did is sort of picked a framework that they've been working on this for a couple of years, picked a framework that they want to use in communities because they would like to roll this out broadly across the country. We were picked for the second cohort, so us and 5 other communities were selected this year. But the idea really is, and let me step back a little bit. So this idea of a welcoming center, is it a place?
Yeah.
About 3 years ago, through the work that we've gotten involved in, and again, it was our students that really got us involved in immigration work back in 2010. But about 3 years ago, there was a meeting in town with someone from the state of Illinois, which had a small pot of money for a welcoming center.
Uh-huh.
And the conversation, I think we all sort of had this image that you get a building and you put a sign out front that says welcome, and then you put the agencies that serve immigrants in that building, and it's sort of one-stop shopping for the immigrants. And it's a welcome center. This is a much different concept, and it's much broader and far more impactful. So YUSA began working a couple of years ago with a number of national organizations. One of them is called Welcoming America. It's based out of Atlanta now, but it got started about 10 years ago in Tennessee. There was a push to make English the official language of Tennessee. There were a couple of mosque burnings and a bombing that took place in Tennessee. And so these agencies that worked serving immigrants started talking about, what good does it do for us to try and help these families if the communities that they're living in aren't accepting them?
Right.
And we've really got to change the focus from helping people make the transition in our community to helping our community be a better receiving community.
It's a two-way thing, yeah.
Absolutely. So they came up with this, and they have this wonderful analogy, and this will speak to what the YUSA is doing and what we'll be doing in our community. Is if you think of immigrants, you want immigrant integration is to get them to grow and flourish and be full partners in the community. They contribute and they benefit from that. And you think of the immigrant as a seed, and you go to plant it to grow and flourish. That seed's going to need sunlight, it's going to need water, sort of outside services. But it also is planted in the soil. And if the soil is clay and rocky and stony, that the plant will not, excuse me, there's my phone's ringing.
That's fine. We're very informal on this show.
No idea.
And your phone is... Somebody really wants to talk to you.
I think it's one of my...
one of your fans is
one of my
listening
fans,
to the
one of my
show.
grandkids.
Gee, Mr. Doyle.
Wants to do a video chat with me.
You're so great. I love you.
But what they talk about is if the soil's no good,
Right.
if the receiving community is no good, then that plant will never take hold and never flourish and grow.
So all the sun and all the water and
It doesn't make any
greatest
difference. The
seeds.
services don't matter if we can't be receiving as
Right.
receptive as a community. So they really develop strategies that try and engage the community. What YUSA has identified are sort of these 5 pathways to integrating citizenship. It's things like civic engagement and education and language and job training and economic development. And then identify ways in which that Y can either provide services, can do referrals to others, or do community bridge building.
Okay.
Our approach here is really, because we are not, the current Y is not one where we really want to be in the middle of delivering a lot of services. Where our strengths really exist as an organization is in community bridge building, the working in the community. So some Ys may have more services, but our work's going to be around that. So what we're doing is putting together all the key community stakeholders in our community. So it's the elected officials. So both of the mayors of Urbana and Champaign have agreed to serve on it. The university, the chancellor has appointed one of his assistants to serve on it. We've talked to economic development, but we're trying to get elected officials there and So far, everyone said yes. We're asking immigrant leaders themselves from immigrant communities, whether that's the Congolese, the Guatemalan, Mexican, Chinese. We want them to be part of this. We've also invited the faith community, so from the imam and the rabbi to the Christian ministers. We have the agencies, the nonprofits that are serving, and then finally we have the business community and labor. So we want all of them sitting around the table and talking about what are some of the challenges we face as a community and what can we do. You know, for the last few years that the work's been going on, it's really been small nonprofit groups like CU Immigration Forum, the Refugee Center, the Immigration Project, which provide legal services, and they really don't have the capacity or the resources to really meet the challenges that our community is facing, and now under this current administration. So this is really trying to get the other stakeholders, from the university to the government officials to places like the school districts, the park districts, the MTD, the libraries, where we're sitting around talking about what are some of the challenges, what are things we could do better, identifying that and begin to solve it. So our new American Welcome Center will be our building. There's talk about finding also, since we're on campus, someplace in the community where various agencies come together. But it's as much about bringing together stakeholders, identifying needs, and then beginning to develop solutions for that.
So I'm trying to visualize this. So it's like once a month these people come together in a room?
Probably,
and we just
they probably will only get together 3 or 4 times a year. So our first meeting, we're announcing it this month when we get the full list of who's going to be involved with it. First meeting will probably take place in April. The first step will probably do some asset mapping. Who's doing what out there? So as we've been out, I've probably had about 50 meetings in the last month and a half with community leaders. I'll be talking to a church that does an ESL program, and they'll say we have 65 people on our waiting list. I'll talk to an agency that offers English as a second language, and they'll say we have openings. And so part of it is who's doing what, how do we let the people who are on the waiting list over here know that there's another place to do it? Is anyone doing citizenship classes? Is anyone doing job training for immigrants? So identifying what's going on and what is needed, and that'll probably be the first step. And then we want the stakeholders are there so that, you know, if people need jobs and Carl's looking for employees and immigrants want those jobs, let's pull together a working group that can talk about how we begin to bridge that gap and get people to have those opportunities for those jobs. So it's really figuring out what are the areas of need and then having the stakeholders. So it's really, those meetings will happen 3 or 4 times a year, and it's only identifying where we need to be working. Then the work happens over the next 3 to 6 months and try and resolve that.
So you're doing all the work. And the other people, like the mayors and chancellors and whoever who come, they're waiting for you to tell them what to do, kind of. I mean,
well, so here's I think it's better to think if we're all sitting around the table and we identify here are 3 issues. Let's say it's English as a second language. There's not enough people. There's gaps in terms of that. It's like, well, who can solve this problem? And I think for the last couple of years, everyone says, well, how about the Refugee Center? How about CU Immigration Forum? I mean, you know, from CU Immigration Forum, we try and tackle stuff that it's, 20 volunteers sitting around trying to figure out how to meet this need in the community, and we can't do job training. We're just not set up for that. But if we're sitting there and the president of Parkland is at the table and they have a job training program and the city's over here and they want to support it but they can't handle it, well, maybe the city would fund that at Parkland. So it's not about us doing the work as much as getting those people in the room to realize what's the need and then break off in the group. So the mayor might come to that meeting and hear, hey, there's job training opportunity. I want my economic development person meeting with that person. So then we'll pull together the 4 key players or 10, talk about what needs to be done. So there'll be work that the sort of the big names won't necessarily be at all those meetings, but they'll be able to designate which staff ought to be going to those meetings and help figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's really about convening stakeholders, identifying those needs, having immigrant leaders. I mean, I would be surprised if most of the people who will be on this get to sit down too often with some of the community leaders in the immigrant community to hear from them and talk to them about what's going on and what their needs are. Similarly, I don't think a lot of us, and we have been doing this work for the last 6 or 7 years, that's all I've been doing it, maybe you longer. I was out at the research park, and there are businesses out there who are having a forum of their own on March 30th about the impact of the immigration laws on these high-tech firms that are in Champaign-Urbana. They're concerned about it. It's a major concern for them.
Yeah.
We're over here banging our heads on trying to get stuff done, and these guys have the legitimate resources and the self-interest to help solve this problem. They just haven't been at the table, and they haven't had a chance to say, hey, we can help with that part. So I think for us, it's trying to take advantage of the moment. I mean, clearly this is all coming out of the fact that this is an issue not only in our country and our community, but in the world.